Anne of Green Gables, Chapter 1, Beginnings. It was a sunny afternoon in June. Mrs. Lynde looked out her kitchen window and saw Matthew Cuthbert drive by in a horse and buggy. "Where is Matthew Cuthbert going?" wondered Mrs. Lynde. "And why is he wearing his best suit? He never goes visiting. He's much too quiet and shy." Mrs. Lynde liked to know what everyone in Avonlea was doing. Matthew lived at Green Gables with his sister Marilla, so Mrs. Lynde decided to walk over to Green Gables. When Mrs. Lynde got to Green Gables, she found Marilla Cuthbert in the kitchen. Marilla was a tall, thin woman with gray-streaked dark hair. It was twisted into a hard knot at the back of her head. "Good evening, Rachel," she said. "It's a fine evening, isn't it? Won't you sit down?" "I saw Matthew going off," Mrs. Lynde said. "I was afraid you were sick. I thought maybe he was going to get the doctor." "Oh, no, I'm quite well. Matthew went to Bright River. We're getting a boy from the orphanage in Nova Scotia. He's coming on the train tonight." Mrs. Lynde could not believe her ears. Marilla and Matthew adopting a boy? The world was certainly turning upside down. "Are you serious about this, Marilla?" asked Mrs. Lynde. "Oh, yes, of course," Marilla said. "Matthew is getting on in years. He isn't as strong as he once was. We decided a boy could help him on the farm." Mrs. Lynde wanted to stay until Matthew came home with the boy, but it would be at least 2 hours before they arrived. She decided to go up the road and tell the surprising news to Mrs. Bell. "I'm sorry for that poor orphan," Mrs. Lynde said when she was back out in the lane. "Matthew and Marilla don't know anything about raising children." When Matthew Cuthbert arrived at the station, there was no sign of the train. The long platform was empty except for a girl sitting at the end. The station master was locking up the ticket office. "Will the 5:30 train be along soon?" Matthew asked. "The train's been in and gone," the station master said. "But there was a passenger for you, a little girl." "I don't understand," Matthew said. "Mrs. Spencer was supposed to send a boy, not a girl." "Well, you had better talk to the girl," said the station master. "She's been waiting for you." The girl watched Matthew walk toward her. She was wearing a very ugly yellowish-gray dress. Beneath her faded brown sailor hat were 2 thick red braids. She had a small, thin, freckled face and huge gray-green eyes. "I suppose you are Matthew Cuthbert of Green Gables," the girl said. "I was afraid you weren't coming. I made up my mind that if you didn't come, I'd climb in that tree over there to sleep. Don't you think it would be lovely to sleep in a tree all white with moonlight?" Matthew looked into the girl's glowing eyes. He knew he couldn't tell her there had been a mistake. He had to take her home to Green Gables. "I'm sorry I was late," he said. "Come along, give me your bag." "Oh, I can carry it," the girl said. "It's got all my worldly goods in it, but it isn't heavy." Matthew led the way to the horse and buggy. "It's wonderful that I'm going to live with you," the girl said. "Were you ever in an orphanage?" "It's worse than anything. There isn't much scope for imagination in an orphanage, believe me." The girl talked all the way back to Avonlea. Matthew didn't mind. He found that he liked this lively little girl. They drove up a hill and rounded a corner. The girl pointed to one of the farms along a slope beyond the valley below. "That's Green Gables, isn't it?" she asked. Well, you've guessed it, Matthew said. The girl sighed happily. I was afraid it was only a dream, but it's real. We're nearly home.